Thank you, Rob.
No, it's quite difficult, isn't it?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And as a former head teacher, I feel obliged at this point to use my head teacher voice and invite everyone to come and sit down and take their seats and listen to the fantastic panel that we've managed to pull together this afternoon. The theme of today is opportunity. In fact, I'm just going to wait for the guys at the back.
Let's wait till they get back.
Can I hear you?
No.
That's okay. Thanks, everyone. Well, I haven't been a head teacher for 6 years, but it's good to know that the head teacher voice still works. Thank you so much. Listen, we've got a great panel here this afternoon, and the theme of today is opportunity. And you can't talk about opportunity and creating opportunity for all without talking about education in all of its forms: schools, skills, apprenticeships, training in its broadest sense. So I'm delighted that we've been able to put a panel together on that theme this afternoon, and we've got a fantastic group of people here joining us to share their thoughts on where we are as a country and where we can go next. So on the panel this afternoon, we have Lord John Hutton, former Secretary of State in the Labour government, but also chair of Make UK and Pearson Engineering. We've also got Kerry, Dryburgh, Executive Vice Principal for People and Culture at BP. We've got Philip Bouverat, the Director of Global External Affairs at JCB. And on the end, we've got Dame Rachel de Souza, formerly used to run a group of schools, but now the Children's Commissioner for England. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, everybody. I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes just to share their initial thoughts, and then we're going to move into a conversation. John, if I can ask you to start. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference this afternoon. It's a great pleasure, a great honor for me to be here. I'm really going to speak about manufacturing and the role that the manufacturing sector can play in building a successful economy here in our country, and also helping young people build long-term, successful, good careers. And one thing I want to start with is a thing that always bugs me about this subject. You hear people say, well, we live in a post-industrial economy. Well, no, we don't. Britain is still one of the largest manufacturing countries in the world. We employ hundreds of thousands of people here. Half of all of our exports as a country are manufactured goods. And 2/3 of all research and development in the UK is in the manufacturing sector. So the manufacturing sector can play a significant role. It is facing significant headwinds at the moment. Some of these headwinds are global in their nature. Obviously, the pandemic hasn't helped, still isn't helping. War in Ukraine, big issue. Disruption to supply chains, high cost of energy. But really, one of the big headwinds here, and I think this is relevant to us today, is what's happening on the skills and labour shortages. In the UK right now, we face a chronic labour and skills shortage. Now, this is not the responsibility of one government. This has been a problem of successive governments, but it's being felt now in the manufacturing sector very acutely. There are nearly 100,000 vacancies currently today as we speak in manufacturing economy, and we can't fill them. And the loss of output, probably about £8 billion a year to the UK economy, just from the labour and skills shortage alone. So what are we going to do about it? Well, a couple of quick things. If I was still a minister, I'd be interested in looking at. One, the Apprentice Levy, which has been in place since 2016, is simply not working. It's effectively a tax on the manufacturing sector and other sectors. £3 billion went back to the Treasury last year. It's money unspent on training apprentices. And we've got to stop this, because this is not helping our economy. There are a couple of things we could do quite quickly on the Apprenticeship Levy. I think it should be a ring-fenced fund that can only be spent on training and equipping the next generation of skilled workers for our economy. At the moment, it's, as I said, a tax on business, and that's not reasonable or fair. It's not what it was supposed to be doing. I think there are other things we can do with the training levy as well. In the manufacturing sector, using the apprenticeship levy to support apprenticeships is very difficult, because our apprenticeships tend to be much more expensive, cash expensive. We need equipment, we need tools. This is not part and parcel of the normal apprenticeship program. We can't use the apprenticeship levy with those extra costs. Secondly, so we need a real root and branch review quickly of the apprenticeship levy to support growth. I think the other problem, and I hope that for a conference organised by the CPS and Margaret Thatcher Conference, this might be a message I hope that you might find odd coming from a former Labour Secretary of State, but the market for training in the UK is broken. there isn't a responsive market for private providers to step in and help equip the next generation of trainers. And I know this, I can speak this from personal experience. The rules are rigged against us, and I'm happy to explain that later in the course of questioning. I think overseas recruitment, we've got to have another look at how we do that. It's crazy that certain skills have been on the shortage occupation list for decades. It's an indication that we are not planning for the skills agenda properly in this country. Shortage should be short term, not long term. We've got to rejig that. And if you're not on the shortage occupation list and you want to use the points-based system to bring in skilled workers, it's too expensive, takes too long, and market opportunities are gone in your business before you get round to having a permit to recruit a skilled worker that you can't find in the UK. So there's quite a lot wrong with our labour and skills market. There's great opportunity for UK manufacturers right now. Our order books are full. We just quite often can't fill those orders because we haven't got the skilled workers. And how crazy a situation is that to find yourself in?
John, thank you so much. That's an absolutely superb insight. Kerry, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. And as I think about opportunity and I reflect on everyone in this room, it's a room full of many people who are at the top of their game. And one thing I would say about that is, how do we get here? Through support and through opportunity. But we may also have got here with very different paths. And as I reflect on that at BP, I actually started my career through a very different path. I left school at 16 as an apprentice, and I studied and worked for many, many years. And if I think back then, what I realize now throughout my career is those opportunities that I've been lucky enough to experience would have felt very distant for me at 16. And as I think about the work we do at BP, it's actually in keeping with our ethos to think about how do we make sure that everyone in Britain today has access to opportunity. And at BP, we're doing three things to focus on that. We are focusing on schools and colleges and the work we do with schools and colleges, on apprenticeships and internships, and thirdly, through training for our existing employees. And we're doing that in partnership in many different ways. So just very briefly then, schools and colleges. We focus very much on STEM education, and we also know that today the individuals in our schools and colleges between 11 and 17, 27% of those students have what we call low science capital. And if we don't improve that, we're actually not going to create the pipeline of talent that we need to build STEM careers in our country. So we're doing a lot of work as part of a number of initiatives that we've done over the last 50 years in this country to partner with schools as part of an initiative called Energising Futures. And we're also creating virtual academies in partnership with another global organisation, AFS. So a lot of what we focus on is creating the right talent pathways and focusing on education. Secondly, what are we doing around apprenticeships and internships? So this is about giving people access. And that's why in our company we've committed to a social mobility ambition to double the number of apprenticeships in our company globally to 2,000 by 2030 or sooner, as well as increasing the number of work experience placements and internships to 500 by the end of next year. And then lastly, what are we doing for all of our employees? As we think about the transition, the energy transition, providing energy for today and for the future, it's about helping our existing employees learn new skills and develop themselves. And we have some great examples of that. Caroline White's one who recently transitioned from building major oil and gas projects to working in our renewables business in our hydrogen organisation. So those three areas of focus. And finally, it's about partnership. We can't do this despite all our ambition and our energy alone. We do it in partnership with the third sector, with the government, and of course with other industries. And just to add to the previous comments, I think there are two areas we need to continue to focus on. One is certainly how do we do that in the supply chain and use our supply chain to help us with these social mobility ambitions. And secondly, the apprenticeship levy. We need more flexibility around the levy to enable us to continue to grow new jobs and skills in our country.
That's great. Thank you so much, Kerry. Philip, over to you.
Thank you. Lord Hutton and I were talking just before this session, and we were winding the clock back about 15 years when you were Minister at Burr.
Yeah, happy days, yeah.
And you said to me about half an hour ago, how did that academy idea go? Did you get it off the ground? So I'm very pleased to say we did. About 20 years ago, we were really struggling not only to see engineers come through the UK university system, but attracting them to come and work in the middle of Staffordshire, a long way from the lure of jobs in London and the city or whatever. And it was quite a struggle to persuade these graduate engineers. So we started doing the normal thing, which was offering them a bit of a sponsorship. And they came and gave us some time, but ultimately it was tricky hanging on to them. So we decided to go on a journey, and that journey was to sponsor a secondary state school which specialized in engineering subjects. It wasn't a particularly easy journey. If I told you we started, in fact 18 years ago is when we really put the applications in. We had the building, which we donated. We spent about £3 million out of our own money on the basis we could call it a JCB Academy, but it was a state school. Therefore, the catchment area was somewhere between Stoke-on-Trent, Burton, Ashbourne and Derby. So it was what we call the A50 engineering corridor nowadays, where you have Rolls-Royce, Toyota, Alstom trains and various other manufacturing businesses. The interesting thing was we had quite a lot of pushback from the educational establishment and the teachers' union at this point, but we persevered. But the one thing we didn't perhaps realize was we had to go and sell the concept of give us your children. And for 5 years, we had executives, junior executives, senior executives, doing basically talks around the village halls of Staffordshire and Derbyshire. And it was a very simple message. We would like to know if you want your children to have a career in engineering. If so, send them to us. I think we're now the most oversubscribed school, certainly in Derbyshire and Staffordshire. We can't select our students. They come from all walks of life. Their parents can't drop them off because we provide buses. They don't have homework because they stay at school to do their homework. They have a house system. They leave their mobile phones in their lockers, they take out their laptops and they work. We've got currently 850 students, and we've got UTC status, so we have another 250, possibly 300 apprentices. Having a school, there's no point in working at 30 hours a week and closing it for 3 months a year. It's a great asset, you've got to keep it working. The productivity is terribly important. So, we decided how should we set this up. We started with sixth form, but we gave a route map for apprentices to come off as early as the age of 16 at the beginning. Sorry, at sixth form they came off as degree apprentices. Then we started 13 to 16 onto 18, and then now we're taking 11-year-olds. They are not generally going to university. They're coming to our industry partners or ourselves. And I'll just say who those industry partners are. We've got our core partners are Rolls-Royce, Toyota, Bosch, Redcraft, Jaguar Land Rover, and National Grid. We've managed to get a feeling going that these children, when they come, aspire to work for one of these companies. Obviously, we hope it's us. But with the Rolls-Royce nuclear program, there were no nuclear engineers. So, unfortunately, they're hoovering up a lot of our very bright sixth formers at the moment, but that's good. We've got, I think it's 750 people children, or now they're young adults, working in those companies out of the 2,000 that we've put through in the last 8 or 9 years. So we'll be fully operational now. We've 3 years from 11 right the way through. So we think in the next 10 years we'll be able to do at least 5,000. We call them learners. We can't call them students anymore for some reason. But we feel that they are dedicated to engineering. They stick with it. We've had no dropout. We'd like to see more female coming into the engineering, but that's up to their parents at the age of 11. It's not up to them, really. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Philip. It's a great story, Tim. We'll come back to it in a minute. Dame Rachel.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to be here. I have been a teacher and head teacher for 32 years before taking on the role of Children's Commissioner, and it's always been my mission and is my mission now to make this the best place, the best country for children to grow up in. Now, I want to just take us back to 2005-06 when I was setting up my first Tony Blair-sponsored academy in Luton, a bottom 200 school, quite right at the beginning of the reform movement. There were still schools at that point that were totally out of order, with incredibly poor performance. Behaviour was terrible. And the reform movement then, the sponsored academy movement, was about taking those schools that were really, really in trouble and turning them around. Then we came to the Tory government in 2010. Michael Gove put his foot on the gas. I went to my next academy and then eventually opened a group of schools called the Inspiration Trust on the Suffolk-Norfolk coast, including a maths and science free school and a range of failing schools that we turned around, and we worked together as a group of schools to do the best for our children. What was at the bottom, the golden thread from that Blair moment through Gove and onwards, was this belief that we could radically transform education, that we could do so much better, and we needed education to be better, and that children from the most disadvantaged areas deserved as good an experience and as good a set of outcomes and could achieve them as any other child and every other child in our country. It was a roller coaster, and it was fantastic. And what I would say to you is that probably the best policies and the most successful policies from 2005 right up until lockdown were the education policies. We should be proud of what was achieved. The gap was narrowed. Schools are, to my mind, unrecognisable. There's far greater diversity of schools. Look at the fantastic JCB Academy, Mark Lehain's Bedford Academy, my academies. The schools have absolutely blossomed and delivered for their local areas. But two things I'd say. Lockdown, has been a huge challenge. So the legacy of lockdown really has widened that gap again. And I think we have to really commit ourselves to a programme of improvement, a reform programme that's twice as good as what's gone before. So from those sort of brilliant gains, we now are in a position where the latest attendance figures, persistent absence at 27%, most of those been, really, really high, of the number of those been free school meal, children on free school meals, children from disadvantaged backgrounds, children with special educational needs. We've got a massive job to do. But let's see this as a positive, as a positive challenge rather than something we can't do. Let's change the narrative. So when I became Children's Commissioner, I decided I was going to go out and speak. It was March 21. I turned up at the Department for Education. There was no one there but the Secretary of State and me. And I decided I was going to do a survey of England's children and find out what the barriers were to them succeeding, what they needed to thrive, and what they wanted for their futures. And they told me a lot of things, but what was interesting, I got 500,000 responses, the largest survey response in the world from children. And they told me, 80% of them told me they were happy, 20% included children who were seriously vulnerable. One of the biggest things after their mental health well-being was life at school, and success at school. We have a generation that wants to work hard, that wants to roll its sleeve up, but are crying out for support. And there really is still a job to do. If we haven't even got the kids back to school, that job of getting standards up again and closing the gap is still there to be done. But the kids are up for it. They also told me that one of the biggest things, in fact, the number one thing they wanted for their future was a good job or a good career. Now, I met the next Elon Musk. I met the next two prime ministers. We're probably going to need them the rate we're going through them. But I also heard from a huge number of children, of that 500,000, from all around this country who wanted great local jobs. They wanted skills, apprenticeships, they wanted a curriculum that allowed them to have some agency and control about their future. And I think that's really, really important. So I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about it. They also were saying, how can we get, how can we know more about jobs? How can we know more about careers? How can we get internships? How can we do work experience where no one will give us them after lockdown? So I think it's simple, it's clear. We've got a massive job to do to keep standards high, narrow the gap, keep all the gains from before and improve on them, but also engage with the skills agenda, giving kids what they really want and need, which is good for them and good for the country. So that's my call to action to you today.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, everyone. Before we go any further, I'm going to do a little bit of audience participation. Okay, so can you please raise your hand if you went to school? Okay, take your hand down. Thank you. Right, can you raise your hand if you went to university? Hands down. Can you raise your hand if you did a non-university route, like an apprenticeship? Just look around, okay? So thank you. So the reason why I'm doing that, thank you so much, is often the discussion about education and what we can do to improve the odds, the opportunity for younger people, very much is focused on our own experiences. I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. Everyone's been to school, so everyone has a view about what schools should do, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But then when we talk about results days in the summer, you'll notice that the focus is about A-levels, and only half of young people at 18 are doing A-levels. When we talk about opportunities and funding for people at the age of 18 onwards, until very recently, it's largely been about how do we fund people with university, which is great, but it's literally only in the last few months we've had clarity over what the lifelong learning entitlement funding will be. Just out of interest, hands up if you've heard about the lifelong learning entitlement. Don't be embarrassed. Hands up if you haven't heard about the lifelong learning entitlement. Okay, so we're going to drill into some of those things, and I just wanted to draw out the fact that so many of us, including myself, only have a partial picture of what young people are dealing with in terms of their opportunities in terms of education. So we're going to talk about schools now. Philip, can we come back to JCB Academy? You were telling me lots about that before we came out here. It's a massive success. What are the 2 or 3 things you think that have made it such a success?
I think the geography of where we are in the country has been attributed to that. If you drive up and down the A50, you can visibly see signposts to Rolls-Royce. You drive past 3 of our factories. Most of the people in the area work within this ecosystem. So bringing the children and the parents into the ecosystem of the industries that spread out along that corridor, which actually defines the north of the Midlands. So you've got East Midlands on one side, West Midlands on the other. You get this sort of, I'm going to stay here because obviously I'm living with my parents when I'm at school. I don't want to get a university loan, so I'm going to get my degree and go and work for Rolls-Royce or JCB or somebody. And the first thing I'm going to do is buy myself a car. I mean, and that's it. I mean, it's as simple as they're there, they buy a car. They then will meet a partner, they might buy a house, they might stay there. I mean, we sincerely hope that some of the students coming through the academy now, we hope our next chief executive is going to come out of the academy. We really do. We've got some very promising young men and women coming through already who are coming through with confidence and purpose because from the age, a fairly early age now, they know what they wanted to do. So, I mean, that's the one thing, and it's geography, and you can't recreate geography, and we're just lucky that we've got those different companies. We haven't got ships, but we've got trains, planes, and automobiles, so we've got sort of pretty much everything. The other thing, I suppose, is discipline. We put them in a house system, we make them wear a uniform, we keep some of the old-fashioned values whilst paying attention to some of the new issues. Learners, not students now, and so on. We treat everybody absolutely as equally, but we give them the opportunity very early on to understand what industry is and what sort of part they could play in it. So, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but the only other thing I'd say is the quality of education and the conversion rate into either apprentices or the GCSE and AS results are right up there in the upper decile. So, and as I say, we've got no dropout rate because they know where they want to go.
That's pretty incredible to have a dropout rate so low. And Rachel, if I can move on to you, you were talking about how far things had come up to the point of COVID. Like, what was the special sauce? What were the magic ingredients that enabled that to happen, like you said, from the early 2000s through
Right,
to COVID?
so government focus, I think is important. I just don't think I think we need to get that focus back on education as in all its breadth as absolutely critical for this country and this country's future. And I think we need that focus for government. Then there was freedom for the leaders and the professionals to actually create the schools and deliver the education that was needed in local areas, whether it's a JCB, whether it's a math school, you know, in the centre of Norwich, where we had 15,000 sixth formers, fewer than 300 doing physics, you know, so, and yet we had the energy industry, the John Innes Centre, and no one crying out for engineering and maths graduates and nobody doing these subjects. So, you know, actually being able to deliver the curriculum that's needed in an area to deliver for skills and that kids want. I think also an absolute obsession and belief that kids can achieve. And that was from top to bottom, from Andrew Adonis right through, you know, right through every set of ministers I worked with, every set of leaders I worked with, a belief that kids truly can achieve. And, you know, whatever it takes as well. There was a concept of just because when I started teaching, people would say to me, you know, I remember my first sponsored academy, it had 15% of children getting maths and English GCSEs. It had been failing for 20 years. It had been Ofsted failing for X many years. Grandparents were queuing outside and like picketing because it was so bad. And we just had the belief that if we just put the resource in, these kids could do it. I had kids who hadn't had a maths teacher for 5 years, and what we did was we taught them maths through Christmas, through Easter, you know, and we got them their maths, and they didn't end up driving around the estate on their bikes. They went to college, and I think it was we were what's the word, Jesuitical about delivery and that every kid could, and we need that back. We are facing some of the most adverse the adverse situation, following lockdown. We've got kids genuinely suffering, we've got teacher recruitment problems. We need to really focus on education. We need government focused on it. We need that sense of belief and can do that people like this man, yourselves, really did, and we need to get back to that spirit because the children are worth it. So,
if I can bring you in here, John, you were part of a government that was all like education, and a lot of the changes that came through under Labour were in the face of opposition from some of its traditional supporters, the trade unions, the teaching profession and so on. What was it, do you think, that enabled Labour to start to bring those reforms through, which laid the groundwork for everything that's happened since 2010? Why were they able to do that?
Well, I think there were a couple of factors at play there. I mean, the leadership that Tony gave to the education reform agenda was very strong, and he believed in it very deeply. I think, secondly, and you need that. If you don't have leadership to push an agenda in government, it's nothing. It's going to happen. I think the other thing, and this is a statement of fact. I hope it's not controversial. I've put being controversial behind me, hopefully. Sometimes it's easier for a Labour government to take on some of those vested interests in the public sector than it is a Conservative government. I think it's a frustration for me at the moment. I mean, you look at other aspects of the public services that don't get that reform approach now. It's maybe just too difficult for a Conservative government, for example, to look at really taking another look at the NHS. The NHS is failing us. It's not a good value for money service, and too many people are waiting, too many people are dying to get treatment. For Labour, yes, I mean, it's all about the leadership, but I do think it's about political will, and sometimes, as I said, it's easier for a Labour government because we're rooted in some of these suppose values isn't the right word, but it's where we come from as a movement. It's easier for us to take some of these challenges on, and to remind people that actually it's not about the teachers, it's not about the unions, it's about the kids, it's about the patients. And that's where our focus has got to be on, and I'm afraid it hasn't been for quite some time. But if I can, Mark, just very quickly, I made reference in my remarks to what I think is going wrong in the vocational and technical training at the moment. And I applaud what Philip has done at JCB, fantastic. So there are lots of really great vocational training providers in the UK, but we don't have a responsive, dynamic training marketplace. And I believe very strongly that this is a place where a dynamic market can help improve the quality and choice and diversity available to employers. And let me just give you one example of where I think the market is currently rigged against private training providers in the vocational space. If a state-supported training provider fails an Ofsted inspection, so it's rated as inadequate, it can continue its apprenticeship training, its vocational training. The money keeps flowing. If a private training provider gets an inadequate rating, it has to close. Now, call me old-fashioned, but that looks like a state subsidy to me. That looks like a rigged market that supports the state provider over the private provider. And I think that's a fundamentally unfair set of ground rules. And what it's doing is keeping out of this marketplace really interesting companies who might want to come in and help employers with their vocational training needs, because there's this absolute cliff edge. I'm all for Ofsted and a proper inspection regime, but I'm not in favor of a rule that favors the publicly funded organizations over the private providers. Why would we want to sit down and design a system? Because this is not an accident, this is designed into the system to effectively exclude any ramp up or extra provision coming in from the private sector. The risks are too great. You lose all your capital, you're out of the business, period. Virtually no appeal against an Ofsted inspection. Good luck with you if you try that route. It's not a market that's delivering for employers. So I really do say this as strongly as I can. Whoever is in government, we've really got to get a grip of the drift in vocational and training education. There are too many mess-ups, there are too many rules that don't help deliver the next generation of skilled workers that we need. And the future for us as an economy, if we're going to be the nation that we all want us to be, believe we are still, the role for advanced manufacturing has got to be center stage. That's the way Britain is going to be a great economy in the future decades. A strong manufacturing sector, heavily based in the advanced technologies of the future, whether it's AI or digital, wherever it is. If we leave that ground, we're going to be a poorer nation. And I think right now today there's a danger that that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, listen, thank you so much for that, and we're absolutely going to come back and delve into the apprenticeship issues that people have brought up already in a minute. But before we do, Kerry, you brought up a really interesting stat, 27% of pupils have low science capital, and so you guys have been working with schools and colleges to try and improve that. Are you seeing any impact on that, of that work that you're doing? And what else do you think we could be doing as employers or as teachers or whatever to try and drive up that science capital of young people?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Mark. And if I reflect back on my own experience, when I left school at 16, I would say you can't be what you can't see, right? And you look around you and you just see employers that happen to be in the vicinity and you think, okay, what's the best option? And so that's why I believe this work is so important, because it's important on companies like ours and others to be working with different educational establishments. And so what are we doing? Well, the work we've been doing, which has been in place now for over 50 years here in the UK, has impacted 1.7 million students. We've supported 108,000 teachers across the UK as well with ready-to-go resources. And in fact, we've just literally last month revamped all of those resources using external support, and that information is now available to schools right across the UK. I think when you then take that information and those resources, the critical thing for me is how do you help students really use that information to solve real world challenges? And so that's why, some of the other initiatives that we're involved with are all about solving those challenges, whether it's, competitions in schools, whether it's the work we're doing with AFS, which is very much focused on projects that students can solve. I think it does make an impact, and ultimately that will flow through to those that choose to take STEM degrees or STEM apprenticeship programs. And actually right now, the challenge for me is more around how can we as an organisation and others really ramp up the number of apprenticeship programmes and offer those to students across the country. We have a really nice example of a lady called Hibba, actually, who came from Bolton. And she was from a family, she had two brothers. Both of her brothers applied to our apprenticeship programme and didn't get through. They suggested she applied, which she did, and she's now a technician in our offshore operations in the North Sea. And Hibba moved herself at 16 from Bolton to Aberdeen to take part in this programme, and she's just a phenomenal individual. And it's stories like that that give me hope, actually. I think the more we can touch people, the more we can make sure we're advertising in the right places, it will just continue to generate more and more jobs, which is what this is about.
That's an absolutely awesome story, and hopefully we can have lots more young people doing that. So a little bit more audience participation, if that's okay. Can you raise your hand if you work for an organisation that currently employs apprenticeships? Brilliant. Can you please raise your hand if you work for an organisation that's thought about doing it, but then didn't go ahead with it for whatever reason? There's a few there. So again, often when I talk to employers, sometimes they're a bit wary about taking apprenticeships on, and often they can't find the right apprenticeship providers to work with them on that. So we're going to delve into the issue around apprenticeships now. So John, I'll start with you. So let's go back to this point. You said you want to see the sort of the whole process of apprenticeships reformed around the levy, but also around the trainers that can do it. Let's spend a little bit of time unpicking that. So what do you think's the problem with the apprenticeship levy? What do you think we should be doing and that we're not doing now?
Well, it's become a tax. It was right in principle to require employers to contribute, because not all employers were, and I have no problem with the concept of the apprenticeship levy, but bless them, like any initiative like this just gets so surrounded with rules and red tape, it begins to sort of defeat itself or lose sight of itself, and I'm afraid we've lost sight of the fundamental issue here. This is a pot of money that should be available to train more apprentices. So we're raising billions of pounds through the levy, and the number of apprentices that are going through the system has fallen by about a third. Well, there's obviously something wrong. I'm talking manufacturing apprentices now. We've gone from nearly 80,000 a year to 50,000 a year, at a time when really we need to be doing the opposite. We need to be ramping up the number of apprenticeship training schemes in the system. It's not flexible enough, and certainly for manufacturers, there are so many limits on what the money can be spent. It doesn't help us at all. We can't invest in some of the tools and the machinery and so on that go with modern engineering apprenticeships. And not to give the game away, it's got more expensive to train engineering apprentices for the skills that they're going to need for the future. So there really does need to be a complete rethink. I think. But we don't have many years to do this. I don't want this to disappear into the sort of the exhaust pipe of Whitehall. It could quite easily do that. There's some quick things we could do. We have to be more flexible about what the money can be used. It should only be used to support apprenticeship training, not go back into the Treasury as part of general taxation, because that's exactly what is happening at the moment. And this money is not being used for the purposes for which employers were required to contribute. And I think as a matter of principle, that's wrong. I don't think this should become a form of covert taxation. That's not how it was sold to us 5-6 years ago. So I think we really do need a fundamental think about that. But I also say this, Mark, from my own experience, I know how difficult this area of policy is in Whitehall, because it involves a number of different departments. But the thing that's missing at the moment, I think, is any kind of real drive or leadership to get a grip of vocational and skills training. And I think this is fundamental to to getting things moving in the right direction. And I'm afraid unless we have that, we can analyze the failings of the apprenticeship levy till the cows come home, and many people have done that. But we need someone to pick this baton up and say, right, I'm going to fix this problem now. I'm going to fix it today. Churchill had this fabulous thing in the war when he was being advised by the military chiefs, this, that, and the other. He'd write on some of his notes, for action this day. I think we should have a similar spirit in government today. It's got to be done this day, not kick this can down the road indefinitely, because that's what's happened.
So that's a very clear message for Gillian Keegan and Rob Halfon, I think. Philip, you guys at JCB, all the work you're doing, what are you seeing in terms of the apprentices you're bringing on? What's working well in the system, and what improvements would you like to see?
Well, just coming back to what Lord Hutton said, you can't turn this on and off. What we're talking about is generational. So you take an 11-year-old, get them interested in STEM subjects, engineering, make them aspire to be working in a certain environment, whether it's oil, gas, aerospace, JCB, Jaguar Land Rover, doesn't matter. We have to have the continuity. And those companies that can offer these places have to take this very, very seriously and partner up with, let's call it schools for the moment, but there could be another sort of mechanism for that. And it's not any one government that's going to solve this, or any tranche of civil servants at the time. It has to be a mindset, it has to be a change. So what's working well are the companies that actually get that and do it. What isn't working well are the companies who maybe have a board of directors or even a chief executive said, "Great, this levy, how on earth can we get some money back on this?" And I'm not saying it happens, but I'm sure it does. And that's what really worries me. People are saying, well, we're paying all this money and how do we get it back? Rather than how do we really plant those acorns and get those seeds growing. And the more we can educate companies to help, the better. So it's working well for the companies that are dedicated to doing it and think of it generationally. It is not working well for those companies that see it as a bit of an irritation of how they can get cash back quickly from throwing a whole load more courses into the system. So it's criticism, but I'm quite clear that we need an inspirational, almost czar on this. Just an idea. I just sort of think you just need someone to be a role model to say, does this country want to have an engineering base? We've got fantastic engineers. We've done fantastic things in this country throughout the world, but we're losing our position because our manufacturing industry is sliding and our educational system is not putting out the right number of engineers.
Kerry, sounds like BP's doing a pretty good job on this front. So why is it working for you guys, and what do you think we need from other businesses to really ramp up apprenticeships and make them work better?
I think like any organisation, there's always opportunity to be better, to do more. Yes, I think we have a clear plan that we're focused on. And I think a couple of things I would say there. So to touch on my earlier point, which is, how do you create awareness around opportunity? So, firstly, it's about pipelines of talent. Are we accessing the right communities? Are we accessing the right schools so that we can advertise those opportunities? And it's then, in my mind, setting the right ambition. So I touched on this ambition for 2,000 apprentices between now and 2030 or sooner. But to underpin that, we need to give people an understanding of what those opportunities also might look like, which is why, in addition, we are focused on work experience placements and internships. So that ambition that underpins it really is all a part of the same strategy, so that you have that pipeline. In addition to that, it's also about focusing on where the cold spots are, so working through our supply chain or indeed with educational partnerships to ensure that we're focusing on economic cold spots, that we can also ensure that our social mobility ambitions bring all of this together. And it's not just about apprenticeships, it's not just about internships, it's also about graduate hiring as well and experienced hiring. So how do you bring all of those things together to create a pipeline of talent that in our case will help us manage the energy transition? But I just want to add one final point which Lord Hutton raised. So the apprenticeship levy, and we touched on this, needs to change. even for companies like ours that have a number of apprentices and maybe doing a relatively decent job, the reality is when we look at new areas of growth in our business, we, for example, are looking at Teesside, Net Zero Teesside. We're building out a business there, but that's not going to be entirely BP jobs. This is jobs in our supply chain, and we need to work with our partners more effectively in that regard. So how can we ensure that we have a levy that gives us even greater access to share that levy in our supply chain is really critical. 5,000 jobs on Teesside, ultimately, how do we make sure that we are enabling that? It's not just about that. It's about ensuring that we can access the levy for top-up training, not just end-to-end educational qualifications, whether that might be top-up training that enables people to retrain, requalify, go offshore, whatever it might be. I think there's an area there that we also need to focus on. Additional costs, we are looking at how we use the levy in our retail business. Our retail business is a very different business model, so how we can use the levy to assist with educational costs there. And then finally, I would just say the requirement for maths and English GCSEs is a challenge in certain communities. So how can we either relax those requirements or indeed, enable, pre-education to enable students to step onto the apprenticeship program? So 4 areas that we really need to change and require greater flexibility.
Thank you. Rachel, I saw you breathe in there when we talk about maths and English requirements. We'll put that to one side. And as a former maths teacher, I think it's down to us as teachers to do even better with our kids in school so they can come to you and employers already equipped. But I hear the challenges it creates. What I wanted to ask you about, Rachel, what are children telling you in your role about their awareness of the kind of opportunities open to them, in particularly apprenticeships? Because a lot of you guys might not know this, but schools are meant to make all of their students aware at various points during their school career of apprenticeships, of the different kind of vocational qualifications they can take. It's called the Baker Amendment. It got slipped into a bill. They're meant to have certain points in a child's career where they're told about these different routes. But what are you hearing about how much children actually know about the options open to them?
So very different in different contexts. So last week I was out in Norfolk in a maths-free school, maths and science-free school. Interestingly, it's mainly an A-level maths and science college. They were incredibly aware of apprenticeships, and many of them, whilst you had your Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, specialist science degree courses, there was a large minority choosing degree apprenticeships and apprenticeships. It's become a real choice of those who know. Week before, I was with Bridget Phillipson in St John's Wood Academy, talking to a large group of children about what they wanted the Prime Minister to know. And it was absolutely fascinating because when we talked to them about, and I think this is coming at it from a funny angle, but it's important, when I asked them what their biggest worries were, we got some of the usual responses, but, there was the table Bridget and I were on, the kids were saying, teenagers were saying cost of living, being able to sort of buy dinner and mum and dad buying dinner, worries about mum and dad with money, and worries about student loan costs, right? So there was some real concerns. So I flipped it and I said, right, called the whole room together, about 50 students, and I said, hands up, who thinks they're going to be richer than their parents? All the hands shot up, right? So I said, how are you going to do it? How are you actually going to achieve that? And for all of them, it was education. For about half of them, they'd mapped out their A-levels, their university courses and where they were going, and the other half were planning great apprenticeships and great skills. So I think it's in the awareness. Wherever I go, young people are talking about it, but they absolutely are crying out to know more about employers, know more about opportunities, and get more of those kind of foot in the door, step up, how can we get onto this? So there's clearly, I think the job of awareness is there, it's the what and the how. But I would say, massively optimistic generation, especially given where they're coming from, and I see that everywhere I go. Just think of all of those hands expecting to be richer than their parents, better off than their parents, given and then look at us looking at economic forecasts and what that might say. I just think that gives us an interesting challenge. And that, of course, is why everyone should do maths. And that actually, my answer to the maths question is, one thing I found is ahead, if you bring really high quality vocational in early, whether it's with providers or in your own school, it can be incredibly motivational. I remember in my second headship, the girls wanted to do beauty. Don't they always want to do beauty? So I thought, right, beauty. We'll set up the salon, but they have to run it as a business, and they have to do their maths, their English, their EBAC, and a module of A-level biology in terms of, to do it. And the motivation of those students to actually do their vocational work actually fed into their academics, and they did it. So I think actually we're missing a trick by not using the vocational, which students really want to do, the hard grind of, some of us might love maths, but some don't, but of maths. So just an example, and actually Michael, given that we are at the Margaret Thatcher Conference, Michael visited that beauty salon and had his nails done and could not believe it. So there you go.
And just to add on the maths point, I'm not arguing that people shouldn't do maths. What I'm arguing about is, as an entry requirement, how can we facilitate those that don't have it already?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
It's absolutely the whole maths and English thing. You guys will know if you work in businesses or employers. We know those work in schools. It is a massive challenge. It's long been a challenge, but we have to do better in schools before we start asking businesses or trainers to do differently. I know that we're running slightly behind time. I just want to go across the panel now. I'm going to come to you first, Rachel, because I know you're very quick on your feet. Action this day. If there was one thing that government or employers or others could do to really improve opportunity through education, what would it be? I'm going to come to you first, Rachel.
It would be two. It would be genuine business partnership. I talk to so many leaders of great companies who want to engage with schools and really get involved in vocational, and they don't know how. We need government to facilitate those relationships, help make that happen, and help make help make that happen in local areas as well. And two, I do think we need to look again at the curriculum. I am a massive supporter of high standards. I love the EBAC, I love maths and English, but I do think we need to look again at knowledge-rich vocational. We need brilliant vocational provision from 14 and possibly even younger, because of its massively motivational, its massive motivational power with young people who disengage from education otherwise.
Thank you, Rachel. Philip, action this day, one thing.
I think the civil service, the Department of Education, needs to be tasked to ensure that they actually work with business and industry. Yeah. They are not separate, they have to be part of it to get the right balance going forward.
Thank you. Kerry.
Has to be the levy, the apprenticeship levy. We need to review it.
Thank you. John?
Yep, no, I agree with Kerry. It's got to be the levy. And we've got to have more ambition. We've got to double the number of apprenticeships going into engineering and manufacturing. So that's where I would start.
So it feels like I've got my next CPS project to do, named after the Led Zeppelin song, When the Levee Breaks. Okay, sorry, it's worth a go. Listen, can we just thank the panel for sharing their thoughts? They've been absolutely superb. Thank you for listening.